Forbes asked, why in the world would Palantir, who's basically working for the intelligence community, why would they acquire a company that has basically been looking at social media and looking at trends? One of their most famous episodes is when they monitored a awards program, and they were looking for people who were A, looking at that program, and B, talking about hairstyles of some particular actresses. And if you were interested in the particular hairstyles of those particular actresses, they immediately sent you some information selling you some hair products. That was very successful. Not long after that, then, Palantir bought them because they want to be able to monitor and data mine instantly in real time and make the kind of adjustments that we saw happening to Kit Daniels' Twitter account, to the Alex Jones Twitter account, and to our Facebook accounts. This is very troubling to see this kind of thing happening. That's the kind of not so subtle, very subtle, I should say, censorship that we're seeing. It's not in your face like the other stuff.
Yeah, well, and in the meantime, before they can control it, they're going to have their trolls and their government bots troll everything and try to control the message in that way. So that's why, you know, they were really trying to attack the press last night and trying to get them to turn their cameras off and confiscate footage. And, you know, Josh reported being trapped in a car, and they knew that there was two journalists, photojournalists in that vehicle, and just getting bombed with these cannons and with the flashbang cannons, and he was frightened, terrified.
Yes.
For 30 minutes they were there just unloading on him, and here we see the Ferguson police chief freaks out after he found out that his cops had arrested two journalists. So here, and it's
two mainstream journalists.
Yeah, exactly.
Washington Post and Huffington Post.
You know, it's not that they're, you know, firing flash grenades on photojournalists, but they've arrested two mainstream journalists. Chief Thomas Jackson was shocked, and he reportedly said, "Oh God," after he learned of these arrests, and he claimed that he immediately called the St. Louis County Police Department, of course, to say, "Let these guys go. You have no idea what kind of a spotlight you're shining on the situation here in Ferguson." So this was obviously a surprise to him as well, that they would go to this level. And we saw that video. We saw how they treated people that were clearly press. Normally, you know, the press have certain freedoms there to report on corruption of the police, the government, and everything. But here they were clearly trying to shut it down, clearly on the attack when people are screaming, "Press, press," and they're getting tear gassed and having rubber bullets shot at their kidneys like
well, and of course,
Biggs.
everybody has the right to film in public. It's not just the Washington Post, but when you arrest a Washington Post reporter, when you shove these guys into the drink machine because they won't turn off their iPhones, that has repercussions, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, could possibly be the reason why kind of these reports are changing by the hour. But the FBI initially was going to start taking over the control of the police operations there in Ferguson. Now they're saying highway police are going to be taking control over it. So obviously the governor of Missouri, he relieved St. Louis County law enforcement from policing these ongoing demonstrations, now putting the highway patrol in charge. Obviously it looks like a war zone there, so they're really kind of concerned about how the local police department there is actually handling this entire situation.
I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see the FBI essentially taking over the investigation, and that's really what is behind all of this from the very beginning. Is not only the brutality of the police to shoot someone down like that, which is what the eyewitnesses say, but when you've got a major conflict in stories between what a lot of eyewitnesses say, when the police immediately confiscate the cameras, again, of the eyewitnesses there, and when they essentially look like they're trying to cover this up as opposed to being transparent and out there, I think the FBI is going to investigate this. They're now going, but the FBI doesn't have the manpower to police it, so I think they're going to put the highway police out there. It's a very different scene today, and we're going to see that as we go to our reporters who are live in Ferguson, Missouri. We saw looting and riot on Sunday. We saw them attacking peaceful protesters last night, and coming after them last night, it was a very intensive, very confrontational attitude. And we've got some law enforcement reactions to that. But I wanted to take a look at what the politicians are saying, because we've got some interesting reactions from politicians. We've got a Democrat congressman from Georgia, John Lewis, talking about what he thinks should happen. Now, he starts out with the right thing, and he comes to an amazing conclusion here. He says people have the right to protest. He's talking on MSNBC. He says they have the right to dissent. They have the right to march in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, and the press has a right to cover it. Ferguson, Missouri is not Congo. It's not China. It's not Russia. We can do better. Now, here's what he wants. President Obama should use the authority of his office to declare martial law, federalize the National Guard, and protect people as they protest. I don't think so. I mean, here he is. He's talking about how we don't want to have martial law. And he's talking about how this is not the Congo, this is not China, this is Russia. And then he wants Obama to act as if it's China, Russia, and the Congo, which is right. Martial law is what we have. Martial law is the problem. Can't you see that? And so then what does Obama do? Today he has a brief press conference, and he essentially does a can't we all just get along, kind of a Rodney King type of thing. He says, well, there's never an excuse for violence against the police. Wait a minute. Was there violence against the police last night? No, there wasn't any violence against the police. The police, as our reporters were pointing out, they were itching for a fight. As Joe Biggs said, he could see a guy standing there with a billy club, kind of twirling it with a smirk on his face. They were itching for an excuse to start. And whether it was a provocateur within the crowd or whether it was just an idiot trying to throw something out. The first time something gets thrown, they let loose with everything they had with the crowd. So let's make it clear, there was no violence against the police. Not on Sunday, not last night. They did that. And then he says there's also no excuse for police to use excessive force against peaceful protesters. Well, that's fine. But, you know, that really talks around the problem, because to say, you know, let's just all get along. We've got what Obama is saying is, look, you guys on that side messed up a little bit, and you guys over here messed up a little bit. That's not really the issue. Rand Paul got to the issue. He said, we have to demilitarize the police. This is a story from Time magazine today. He said, if I had been told to get out of the street as a teenager, there would have been a distinct possibility that I might have smarted off to the cop, but I wouldn't have expected to be shot. And that's what eyewitness accounts are saying happened there. And then he goes on to quote in this op-ed piece, Cato Institute's Walter Olson. He said, why are armored vehicles in a Midwestern inner suburb? Why would cops wear camouflage gear against a terrain patterned by convenience stores and beauty parlors? Well, you know why they would. They want to intimidate people. They want to look like soldiers, and they look like soldiers except for the small police patch there. He says, why would someone identifying himself as an 82nd Airborne Army veteran looking at the Ferguson police scene comment, we rolled lighter than that in an actual war zone? In other words, we weren't that heavily armored when we were fighting abroad. That's the amazing thing about this. And Rand Paul points out with a series of quotes and articles going back through the history, as we have many, many times, he says there is a systemic problem with today's law enforcement. And that systemic problem is coming from the federal government. It's coming from Homeland Security. It's coming from the federal government, which is trying to change the rules of engagement. It has been working for a very long time to militarize our police, to give them a mindset that they are some kind of a paramilitary or actually a military organization, that the people that they're there supposedly to protect are quote unquote civilians. And now they are teaching them that those civilians are essentially counterinsurgency threats to them. Wouldn't you say? How do you feel about that? What do you think about these political reactions, Leanne?
Well, I mean, I just think it's a little insane to say we need to declare martial law there. It appears as though it's already been declared. I mean, there's a curfew. Yeah.
It would be better if we declare it.
Saying it without saying it. Right, yeah, to actually go out there and say it. But the Department of Homeland Security is the one that is responsible for arming these small town police departments. Obviously, St. Louis is a little bit bigger, but I mean, we see small town Indiana or here in Austin, like other small towns are getting grants from the Department of Homeland Security for armored vehicles, guns, aircraft.
Well, besides billions of rounds of ammunition, Homeland Security has gotten, they've purchased 2,700 MRAPs, and we're being told that they're bringing 13,000 MRAPs to America. They've already put out 600 or so, many of them in very small communities. So this is something that is that they're planning on this getting much, much larger. Now, the reaction then is that this police chief is basically being told to stand down by the governor. They're putting the highway patrol in charge. Perhaps they're putting the FBI in charge of the investigation. And now we have a former police chief speaking out. This is an article today on INFOWARS.com saying that the Ferguson military gear was, quote, an act of provocation. Now, this is a former Seattle police chief. He has been there. He's done that. He's made the mistake. He's admitted that he made the mistake because he said, what happened in Seattle in 1999 was a police overreaction. That was when he was police chief there. And he said, it was the worst mistake of my career. We used chemical agents, which is a euphemism for tear gas. That's what they did last night in Ferguson, against nonviolent and essentially non-threatening protesters. That's what they did last night in Ferguson. He said, if they're out there in military gear from the beginning, that's an act of provocation. We just simply need to use defusing techniques. He said that a heavy-handed response to the World Trade Organization riots in Seattle was what he was talking about back in 1999. He went on to say, and specifically point out that one of the things that he was concerned about was the intimidation by attack dogs. And this is something I noticed, Leanne, when we were getting a live feed from them. We saw these guys coming out, how heavily armed they were, and even coming out with the police dogs. And of course, they had heavy police dogs there last night. He said, there is a real place for dogs and police work, but not in the context of a non-violent protest. In fact, using dogs for crowd control is operationally, substantively, and from an image point of view, about the worst thing you can do. He said we should have learned that lesson as an institution back in the 1960s in Birmingham, Alabama, when Bull Connor unleashed his police dogs on non-violent civil rights demonstrators. He was essentially saying to those peaceful protesting Americans, you are the enemy. We've been told that we are the enemy in a gazillion different ways, haven't we, by the Homeland Security purchases. And of course, just as we did back in April when Joe Biggs and I were in Virginia, we walked through an American town that they had built so they could practice their militarized police force or their counterinsurgency techniques by the Asymmetric Warfare Center. This is the Army doing this, setting up this for training police as well as for training Army to tell the American people you are the enemy. If you can't see that you're the enemy based on all of their scenarios, all of their purchases, all of their training facilities, and now based on these actual things that they did last night, I don't know what it takes to get the American people to see this. Right, the terrorists are us. Anyone that might stand up to their tyranny is seen as the actual threat to their national interests. It's not our national interest anymore. Now it's theirs. And we're told, just like Obama is saying, he wants to de-escalate everything. So let's everybody just get along. We've made mistakes on both sides. Let's let everybody just go back, put your feet up, watch a ball game, have some brew or something. Just calm down and don't do anything. I don't think that's the answer. When I go back and look at this, it was years ago, and I want to read this. This is something that we have this quote from Pastor Martin Niemöller all the time. We say, first they came for this group, I didn't do anything. And there is certainly an element, and Rand Paul made that clear. He said, if you don't see that this is coming after the black community disproportionately to the rest of them, you're not paying attention, okay? So we talk about that quote all the time. Everybody's very familiar with that. You may not be familiar with the quote from the Stuttgart Declaration. He said, and this is what Pastor Martin Niemöller, the guy who said, first they came for that group, I didn't do anything. They come for that group, I didn't do anything. Then they came for me and there was nobody to help me. After the war, he got a lot of churches together and he says, he wrote up a confession for them to sign. He said, through us, infinite wrong was brought over many peoples and countries. That which we often testified to in our communities, we express now in the name of the whole church. We did fight for long years in the name of Jesus Christ against the mentality that found its awful expression in the Nazis, in a regime of violence. But we accuse ourselves for not standing to our beliefs more courageously, for not praying more faithfully, for not believing more joyously, and for not loving more ardently. That bothers me because that's what the church is not doing today. I don't see people, there shouldn't have just been black people coming out there protesting last night. They should have had the entire town out there. If we can put ourselves at risk trying to help people in Africa who are suffering from Ebola, Why can't we stop this cancer in our country? Why can't we stand up and have the courage to get out there and do something